Jordana Whyte, Dunedin Wildlife Hospital co-founder. I also see that you're manager of the Wildlife Hospital Trust. That's quite a bit of work to do.
Yeah, it's a lot of behind the scenes work, making sure that we can keep the lights on, for example, with funding and fundraising, media interactions, and the really fun part of my job is the education side, which is part of what we're doing today. So before the Wildlife Hospital was open here in Dunedin, any of the endangered species that were in need of veterinary intervention, for the most part, were having to be flown up to the North Island for treatment. So it's a pretty significant amount of stress and travel, logistics, expense, carbon footprint, all of those things going into sending a lot of our very precious Te species north. Great institutions on the North Island to care for those species, but yeah, there was quite a delay in the treatment. You can imagine it just takes time to get an animal transported. So a big reason why we're in Dunedin is of course this is the wildlife capital of New Zealand. So being here close to where the wildlife are was really important.
Okay, well, what people love us to do is just get straight underway. So I'll move us across to a smaller screen, and we have your presentation. And here we go. Take it away. Excellent. Thanks very much.
Okay, well, tēnā koutou, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. And I'm pretty excited to see how far and wide everybody is located. That's great. And I have seen, somebody mentioned that they're a bird keeper at the Auckland Zoo, and there's a couple of other, maybe some vets and vet nurses in there. So I will just start out by saying straight away, I am not a vet and I am not a vet nurse. I have actually learned quite a bit of knowledge from just being around my teammates at the Wildlife Hospital from the vet team. So I do know some things, but if you have questions that are a little bit more technical and I don't know the answers to them, I'm not going to make it up. I will not lie to you because you will know. So I will just defer if that's what happens. So. But yeah, don't be afraid to ask some of those questions, especially about the patients that I'm going to introduce you to, because I may know some of those answers. All right, so I think I probably addressed this in our intro, but start with the basics. What is the Wildlife Hospital? It's pretty much, as I said, it's in the name, but we do treat only native New Zealand species. We are a veterinary hospital, so that's important. We just provide hospital level care. So for the most part, we rely on working with our many partners in the community for any rehabilitation work that needs to be done with our patients. So for example, we work with Project Karadoo here in Dunedin for all of our Karadoo patients. So when they're medically cleared, they can go out to Nick at Project Karadoo for their rehab to get strong and fed up if they need to gain weight and evaluated before their release. So we're just providing hospital level care. In some cases, we do a little bit of rehab if there aren't any groups doing specific rehab on a species. Not many people doing rehab on giant petrels, for example, so we'll undertake a little bit of that work in hospital. But yeah, for the most part, just veterinary care. So why are we doing this? I imagine that a lot of the people who are joining us here today are also involved in conservation, which is fantastic. And I imagine that you share our vision, which is, what we consider sort of a big, hairy, audacious goal of what we would like to see happen in the world. And for us, that's seeing thriving native wildlife in Aotearoa, New Zealand. As I said, it's a big goal. We can't do that all by ourselves. And so for us, we take our slice of that vision, which is our mission, and that's to improve the well-being of New Zealand's native wildlife through expert veterinary care and through education. So we'll talk about both of those things today, but I just want to say a great big thank you to all of you for participating today. You're included in our education efforts, so thank you very much for helping us fulfill our mission. Now I'd like to introduce you to our founder, Dr. Lisa Argilla. Many of you, maybe some of you have even worked with her, depending on where you're coming from today. But Dr. Lisa, you see across the bottom there, she has lots of initials after her name. So she's spent an awful lot of time and energy learning how to be a veterinarian, specializing in wildlife health. So she is considered a wildlife veterinarian. She has a further specialty in avian health, which of course means birds, which is great because that's mostly what we have here in New Zealand is birds. And then you can see she's just recently added some more initials after her name. Last year, she was inducted as a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit in the Royal Honours, which is very exciting. So that's acknowledging her contributions to conservation and animal welfare. So Dr. Argilla, she had spent a lot of time researching and studying hoiho, or yellow-eyed penguins, as part of her training. And she spent quite a bit of time down here in Dunedin and the south, Otago Southland, the mainland range of the hoiho, as well as in the sub-Antarctic islands. So she had done a lot of work on hoiho, and when she was here doing her field work, was unfortunately coming across a lot of injured hoiho, or hoiho that were unwell. And she was doing her best in situ to kind of help them, assist them, maybe doing some light surgeries, but having to borrow vet clinics after hours while she was here in Dunedin to do that work. Otherwise was then sending these penguins up to the North Island when she was coming across them. And that really made her think, wow, this is a species that's really struggling, and we're maybe doing them a disservice by having to send them so far away to get their care. And really, we could probably get much better outcomes for this species if we could have a facility here in Dunedin that could treat them much faster and get them back out to where they belong faster. So that was really the kernel of what started the Wildlife Hospital, was her work with yellow-eyed penguins. I've got a map here that you can see this. I've got this red line that I've drawn across the South Island, and that is almost an entirely arbitrary line. This is the line. So south of that line represents where most of our patients come from. So we do have Dunedin in our name, and we are located in Dunedin, but we take animals from really pretty far across the South Island. So yeah, most of our patients will come from South Canterbury and then south down through Rakiura, Stewart Island. That said, we actually have had some patients from further north. So we've had some kaka chicks that we hand reared that were from Nelson that were then released into Abel Tasman National Park as part of Project Janzoon. So we will certainly take patients from really anywhere where they need, if they need care. But oftentimes, if an injured animal is coming from the north of the South Island, it's actually faster to get them up to Wellington Zoo or to Wild Space in Palmerston North, or even up to Auckland Zoo. And so it's really about getting the animal the fastest care. There is Yep,
sorry, just a little thing there. I think your cursor isn't coming out in the screens of people watching. I can see it, and you can see it, but I'm not sure whether anyone else.
Okay, sorry. I'm just waving my cursor around the South Island.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling me. Yep, I'll just try to do it verbally then. There is also the South Island Wildlife Hospital in Christchurch. So they take care of most of the patients that come from that area. But we do work with them if they've got a hoiho or something needing a more complex surgery. They could either send it to us, or we certainly advise them on any cases that they need help with. But yeah, just to say that the animals come from far and wide. Probably about half of our patients do come from Southland as well. And a lot of people will ask sort of two questions about the hospital itself, which is, one, where are you located? And two, can we come and visit you? And the answer to the first question is that we are actually located on the campus of the Otago Polytechnic. We are a part of the School of Veterinary Nursing. We're an independent charity, but we work very closely with the Polytech. They are our principal partner. So we are located in a building that was already set up essentially as a veterinary hospital, which is fantastic. We could move right in. And we are integrated with their vet nursing program. So we work with their students. For example, they come through and do rotations through our hospital, or placements in our hospital, and learn a little bit more about wildlife diagnosis, treatment, and husbandry. And this is really important, and that speaks to the first part of our mission, which is, or the second part, a mix actually of both the veterinary piece and the education piece, is that we not only want to provide education for our communities, but also for the veterinary field. So a lot of times, if an injured animal is found, an injured native animal is found, the first port of call will be the local vet. And oftentimes that local vet hasn't had a lot of experience with wildlife, in particular with birds, which is quite a specialty area. And they may not know exactly what to do. And so if we have more trained professionals in vet nurses and in vets, they'll be more likely able to take action on those cases that they see and know what to do and be able to manage that with confidence. So we've developed some programs with the Polytech that we deliver to vet nurses and to vets. So there's some continuing education around wildlife medicine, which we are very excited to provide with our partner. Now, the second part of that question is, can we come and visit you? And unfortunately, the answer is no. We are not open to the public. And the reason for that is we're just not physically set up for it at this time. So we wouldn't be able to bring members of the public through without disturbing our patients, who you can imagine are already pretty stressed out because they're in hospital. But someday we do hope to have a physical facility where people can actually come and see them through one-way glass and soundproofing, so that you can see the work that we do and see the patients that we have in-house. So because I can't bring you to the hospital, I do try to bring the hospital to you a little bit in pictures, give you a little bit of behind the scenes tour. So let's do that now. So we'll start here. This photo is Dr. Argilla bringing a hoiho, or yellow-eyed penguin, back in from surgery into the first of our 3 wildlife wards. So this is the seabird ward. So it's in the name. Again, we try to keep things simple. This is where we treat and keep our seabird patients. So that would be all the different species of penguin that we might see throughout the year. Petrels, albatross chicks, gulls. If it's a seabird, it's going to be in this ward, unless this ward is at capacity, which it often is, especially in the summer. So sometimes we do have to sneak some of our seabird patients into other wards, but typically this is where you'll find it. I would say this is also the smelliest ward. Seabird patients, woof, yeah, it's pretty pongy in there, especially in the summer, as I said. So I don't have specific pictures of our second ward, which looks pretty much like this. That's our forest bird ward. No surprises there. So that's where we would treat Karadoo, Kiwi, Kia, backyard birds that we would, little backyard birds, tui, bellbirds, that kind of thing. And of course, we have a third ward, which is our ICU, or our quarantine ward. Unfortunately, we're all pretty familiar with that word quarantine at this point. But that's the word we use if we have patients that really do need to be separated for just make sure that there are there's no cross contamination. Chicks that maybe don't have a fully developed immune system and need to be kept away from other patients, or perhaps there's a patient that's come in that's had a trauma. Maybe it's been hit by a car, or it's just window strike or something, and needs a quieter place away from the hustle and bustle of the rest of the hospital. We can put them in that ward. And we do have some very special patients in that ward right now, which many of you have probably seen on our social media. And that's a couple of cockapoo chicks. So that's the cockapoo ward at the moment. We have a surgical theater, or an operating theater, of course, in the hospital. Most of the things that you'd expect to see in a people hospital, we have at our hospital as well, just sometimes on a smaller scale, which is a great example here in this photo. Is our surgical bed here is small compared to a human one, as you can imagine. This is Dr. Argilla finishing up a surgery on a hoiho, a yellow-eyed penguin. You can see that it's got a foot bandage there. So it has, I don't recall exactly, we've had so many of these penguins. I don't remember exactly what happened to this one, but I can safe bet is that it was bitten by a predator, which is something that we see quite often in hoiho, and it's also quite seasonal. So we would expect in late summer, early autumn to start seeing hoiho turn up with predator wounds. The prevailing theory is that penguins, the hoiho, are being bitten by barracuda out at sea. We can't actually prove that. We don't know for sure that it's barracuda. And it is a trend that's really just started in the last 5 years or so, 4 years maybe. And we're not sure exactly why that is, but there's some suggestion that with climate change and with things changing out at sea, it means perhaps the foraging behaviors of either the hoiho or the barracuda, or both, have changed. And that means that penguins are encountering these predators in places where, because they haven't had to go search for food in those places before, they wouldn't have encountered them previously. Or perhaps the reverse is true, that the barracuda or whatever predator it is moving into where the penguins are foraging. It is a bit curious. We don't know why they would, if it is barracuda, why they would be attacking hoiho. They don't eat them, so unclear as to why that's happening. And you'll see also there's a flipper bandage on this penguin, but you can see that there is a tube running across its just across the top of its body there over to that flipper bandage, and that's because we've put in an IV line, and the bandage is actually holding that IV line in place. So if you see on social media footage from our seabird ward, you'll see that most of our penguins have that flipper bandage. It's not necessarily because they have flipper injuries. It's just to allow us to push meds and fluids into that IV line during their stay at the hospital. So pretty typical to see that. All right, and we have pretty fully equipped hospital at this point, which is fantastic. So we have some machines that, for example, this one in the background of this photo is an anesthetic machine, and you can see Nurse Gina here is sedating a hoi-ho prior to surgery. That anesthetic machine was actually in use at the Dunedin Public Hospital, so the People Hospital, and then was donated to us when they were decommissioning it and getting new equipment. So works just as well for animals as it does for humans. It saved us a whole heap of money, so that was great. And you can see here the mask that Gina is using to sedate the penguin. We have a whole range of masks of different sizes because we have to sedate a whole range of patients, from little tiny, gray warblers all the way up to adult sea lions. So actually, I think the biggest patient that we've ever had on our in our surgical theater was an adult fur seal. So she had gotten a pup stuck in the birth canal and it had died and she couldn't get it out. So we had to go and bring her in from the beach to pull the pup out. So that was our biggest patient. And I think, if I remember correctly, it was a fledgling gray warbler that was our smallest patient. And I think that weighed in at about 6 grams. So we take on a whole range of sizes. And we also have an Xray machine, a very important tool in our toolkit. So this is, Nurse Gina is preparing a Kia for an Xray. It's a really great chance to see that beautiful orange plumage there. So this is a digital Xray machine, so it sends an instant image over to a laptop that's located on our surgery. And it's great because the vets and vet nurses can see exactly what's happening. If they're in a surgery and they need more information, they can just pop the patient over on the Xray table and get an instant readout. And I'll give you an example here of one of our patient Xrays. This is obviously not a Kia. This is a Kiwi, and I really enjoy showing this image for a number of reasons. One, it's just a cool looking animal. And I'm sorry that my cursor is not working. I don't know why you can't see that, but a couple of things that I will point out. You can see on the left-hand image, sort of on the chest at the bottom, there's a little white line in a diagonal. Hopefully you can see that. You can see it on the right-hand side as well, just on the rib cage there, that little white line. And that's actually a microchip. So that is a chip that was inserted when the Kiwi was a chick. And that is just like a microchip you would put in your pet cat or your pet dog to keep track of them in case they get lost. This is some species of Kiwi are of course quite endangered and are highly managed and tracked. And so they do sometimes have microchips. We also, if we have an unmarked hoi-ho that comes into us, we do microchip them as well. So that all of the animals in the mainland population of hoi-ho are microchipped as well. So we can get a lot of information off those chips, which is great. And the other thing I like to point out about on the image on the right of the Kiwi, you see there's some little triangles there on the side of the body. Those are actually the Kiwi wings. So they do have wings, the Kiwi. Not much left of them over time. They've evolved away, but I tell you what, we do actually see their wings sometimes if they're really angry with us and they want to attack our staff. They could get a little bit, the wings come out, which is pretty cute and not that intimidating, to be honest. So a couple more pieces of equipment in action. On the left-hand side, you'll see what we think is the world's first blood transfusion on a hoi-ho, which sounds grandiose, but of course, remember that the yellow-eyed penguin is endemic to New Zealand, so we're the only ones that have them, but we take it anyway. So sometimes a blood transfusion is sort of a last-ditch effort to save a patient's life. If they come in really not necessarily catastrophically injured, because oftentimes their injuries will cause their deaths, but if they're really sick or they perhaps haven't been found for a long time and they've been unwell for a long time, sometimes a blood transfusion is all we can kind of hope to do to save them. And I'll save you, but before you type in the question, because most people will ask this of me, we don't actually know if there are blood types in penguins like we have in humans. So to kind of get around that, we just would only ever do a blood transfusion from the same species. So in this case, we had a yellow-eyed penguin patient who was ready to go out to rehab at Penguin Place on the peninsula. was deemed healthy enough to donate blood to this particular hoi-ho. And so we were able to get it from that patient. And that piece of equipment that you see there that's performing the blood transfusion, that syringe pump or syringe driver, that's actually the same piece of equipment that you see on the right-hand side. It's just that we didn't own one at the time that we had to do this transfusion, and we had to quick run out and borrow one from a local vet clinic. And we determined that was a piece of equipment that we definitely needed to have in-house. So we have a few of those fluid pumps and syringe drivers now in-house. And you can see the one here on the right is being used to push subcutaneous fluids and meds into this Karadoo that's sitting in an ICU or an incubator unit. That incubator unit helps us keep a patient at a very specific temperature, a specific humidity, and also we can pump different levels of concentrated oxygen into the box as needed as well. So we use those units to keep patients who are, they've again had some pretty traumatic incident. Maybe they've been hit by a car, hit a window. They need extra support and keeping it. We don't want them to use their energy to keep themselves warm. So we put them in the box to keep them warm so they can focus on healing. And we would also sometimes put really quite young chicks in the incubator units as well to keep them at the right temperature. Some other equipment here, we do have endoscopy equipment. So what's happening here in this photo is Dr. Argilla is using an endoscopic camera to look down into the stomach of a bird. Now we can use this for essentially replacing, in some cases, exploratory surgery, which is fantastic. So if, for example, we want to know if a seabird has ingested plastic, we can use the camera to have a look to see, rather than opening the bird up, which of course comes with a lot of risks. So it's great. If we can avoid surgery, we certainly would. So this, I'm not sure, I apologize because I don't actually know exactly what patient this is that's being looked at. But we also have a couple of attachments for our endoscopy equipment that would allow us to even remove foreign objects. So we have some grasping forceps that we could pull things out with, and yeah, a number of other attachments that hopefully help us reduce those really serious surgeries. And I will say, in regards to the plastic and seabirds, we haven't had many patients that have come to us that have ingested plastic, which is great. You do hear about that quite a lot overseas. The question is, are these animals simply dying before they can get care? Are they too far out at sea to get help or to be found? That's possible. We don't know the answer to that. We've had 2 seabird patients come to us in the last couple of years that did ingest plastic. Thankfully, both of them were able to vomit up the plastic before it moved deeper into their digestive system. So they took care of the problem on their own, which was fantastic. We have some laboratory equipment, so we try to do as much as we can in-house without sending things out. This is Dr. Lizzie here. She's looking through our teaching microscope, and what she's looking at is what's shown here on the right, and that is penguin blood. So she's looking at hoi-ho blood, and she's looking for the presence of avian malaria. Avian malaria, unfortunately, is something that is now coming to the South Island. It was present on the North Island before, that was known, but only in the last few years has it cropped up here in Dunedin and in Southland. And unfortunately, it is killing yellow-eyed penguins. So that's a test that we can run in-house to see if there's presence of malaria. And we have a therapy pool in our courtyard. This is being modeled helpfully by Horace. We nicknamed this bird Horace. He is a northern giant petrel. Beautiful bird, and the emphasis is on giant. You don't really get a scale for it in this photo, but he's massive. Very cool bird. The therapy pool is really important for seabirds. So the seabirds have, when they rest on the water like this, they sit on the water, it triggers their instinct to preen. And seabirds have an oil gland in their back, and when they preen, they're actually spreading that oil throughout all of their feathers. And that helps keep them waterproof, which is really important. I hadn't actually thought of that before I started doing this work. Of course, a seabird has to be waterproof. Can't have a soggy seabird; it doesn't work. So that preening instinct is really important. And oftentimes, when they're in hospital, they won't necessarily engage in those behaviors without a bit of prompting. So if our patient is well enough, we will swim them in the pool and try to encourage them to get their waterproofing up. It also helps build their strength. cuts back on boredom, so it's a little bit of enrichment for them to be out in the pool. And it allows our vet team to assess, are they moving naturally the way they should? Are they swimming around and diving and doing the things that they should when they're on the water? If a patient is not well enough, or for example has an open wound and isn't able to go out into the pool, the vets and vet nurses will spray them with water a couple of times a day to kind of trigger that instinct to preen. Food prep is a major part of the team's day. There's no question about it. On any given day, we might have 6 to 10 different species in hospital, and we need to, sometimes they're all eating different things, different diets, different needs. And so, there's no shortage of food prep by the team and by a whole bunch of really amazing volunteers as well to help us get all this sorted. So just a couple of examples here for you. On the left-hand side, there's a Kia platter, which I think looks amazing, with the exception of the cat biscuits, which I don't have really strong interest in eating. And then, of course, on the upper right is a whole bunch of fish that's been weighed and measured for our seabird patients. In this case, I think it was all penguins that were in hospital. And we feed them a mix of things. So we have salmon and usually a white fish like a whiting or a silverside, for example. And we do also, for our really unwell seabird patients or for chicks, we do make a delightful concoction. We call it fish smoothie or fish slurry, which doesn't sound as nice. It's really disgusting, but the seabirds love it. If you ever have the misfortune to walk by one of our windows in the summer when we're cooking up a batch of fish slurry, sorry, very stinky. I don't like fish slurry day, but we, in preparation for hoi-ho season this last year, when we had a lot of chicks, we made 100 liters of fish slurry ahead of time, and we went through all of them and had to make more. So it's pretty serious operation there. And on the lower right, we have a scale, again, is not very indicative, but is a huge bucket of Karadoo mix. So that's beautiful as well. I would probably eat that. So it's got fruits and veggies, some rice, and some other yummies. So seasonally, we do get quite a few Karadoo, usually in the winter in June is kind of when we would expect to have a lot of those patients. So we plan ahead for that as well. All right, now, this is everybody's favorite part. So normally if it's an in-person audience, I do this bit as a quiz. So feel free to do this as a quiz on your own. Feel free to shout at your screens if you know what these animals are. That's absolutely
well, they can write them. They can write them in the little checkbox.
Yeah, that's true.
If they're quick. If they're quick. We'll start with this one on the left, and I do like to start with a tricky one. So this is a bird that you would often hear but not often see. We have them here in Dunedin. They're found, I think, in most parts of New Zealand. This is a shining cuckoo. So, yeah, it's a really well disguised bird. It's one that's pretty, it's a little bush bird, and it likes to, it's a little bit, I don't know, private, I guess, and it's usually hidden in the bush, but you will hear them. If you've heard their call, you'll be familiar. So this sort of the hallmark of the shining cuckoo, as many people will know, is that they actually are pretty sneaky. So they'll scope out another bird's nest. Typically, it would be a gray warbler, maybe a silver eye. And they'll wait for the parent to leave, and they'll go into the nest and push the gray warbler eggs out, lay their own, and then take off. And the gray warbler comes back and the parents have no idea that their eggs have been swapped, and they go ahead and raise those cuckoo babies as their own. Wow.
Which is, you can decide if it's devious or just super intelligent. Up to you. I'm not here to judge. But the funny thing is the shining cuckoos are actually a bigger bird than the gray warbler, and so the chicks are like huge compared to the gray warbler sort of foster parents, and they don't seem to notice or care. So that's pretty interesting. This particular patient came to us from the Dunedin Botanic Garden. Somebody had found it had flown into one of the buildings there at the Botanic Garden and was just had a bit of a shock, but thankfully was absolutely fine. In the upper right here, we have a cute little rudu, or a moorpork, also a native owl. And this cute little guy came to us from Teanau, so it kind of gives you an example of how far away some of our patients come from to get our care. It was found in a rugby field, and we're not exactly sure what happened to it. Might have gotten clipped by a car, might have just had a crash landing, but was uninjured. Just needed a little bit of R&R at the hospital, which we were very happy to provide.
And now this one at the bottom right, this is a tricky one. I actually do just give this one away during the quiz, so don't feel bad if you don't know what it is. It is. Some of you may have put in the chat. It is a petrel. It is a type of petrel. It's called a Kerguelen petrel. This is one that we had to make sure we got right with the ID because it's not one, certainly not one that we see here in Dunedin. This is a pelagic seabird. And what that means is that it spends almost all of its life out at sea. So the only time that it will be on land is when it's breeding and nesting. And other than that, the rest of the year, you wouldn't see it unless you were out on a boat. But what can happen to these birds and other pelagic seabirds, like Horse, for example, that giant petrel that we saw earlier, is they can get tossed around in bad weather. If we have some pretty bad storms, like we've actually had here on the South Island lately, well, everywhere really in New Zealand lately, they can just get a bit tossed around in the storms, and they can also get disoriented by coastal lights, by city lights, and get drawn in, and then have a crash landing, which is probably what happened to this guy here. And the thing to know about these pelagic seabirds is they generally cannot fly again unless they're taking off from water. So unless they're sitting on the surface of the water, or they're from very high up on cliffs, for example, which is where they would nest. So oftentimes, if you will come across a seabird that's sitting on the ground and it doesn't fly away from you, it's probably a pelagic seabird that's had a crash landing and it's not going to go anywhere, so it needs some help. The Kerguelen petrel is one that we certainly wouldn't expect to find on this part of the South Island, even as a storm-wrecked bird. It can happen on the west coast of the South Islands, where they will turn up occasionally if there's been some bad weather. But yeah, oftentimes the storm-wrecked birds aren't actually injured. They just they've probably lost a bit of waterproofing. They've lost some body condition, and they're exhausted and they need some rest and to get some weight put back on them and get their waterproofing up. All right, so very cute small bird here on the left. This is an albatross chick. Believe it or not, that's a baby. That is a toroa. This is a northern royal albatross chick. So if you're in Dunedin or if you visited Dunedin, you probably know about the Royal Albatross Center on the very tip of the Otago Peninsula here. And that's where this bird came from. It was one of the chicks that was hatched out there on Taiaroa Head. And it came to us because it had a broken leg. And I really apologize. I don't remember exactly what happened, if a parent had a crash landing or it just had a bit of a wandering misadventure, which happens from time to time as they start exploring their surroundings. You can see it's really fluffy, this bird, and that's an absolute giveaway that it's chick. So it's got that chick down, that chick fluff. It's not yet fledged and grown its adult feathers, so this bird is not able to fly at this point. Albatross chicks we do treat in the hospital. Albatross adults we do not. So they do not, they don't manage in the hospital. It's too stressful for them, and it does them more harm than good to have them in-house. So if the rangers out at Taiaroa Head they think an adult albatross needs veterinary attention, we will go out to that bird and treat them in the field. And we do try to turn the albatross chicks around as fast as possible, even though we can treat them in-house, and we do. They take up a lot of space. So we do try to get them back out home where they belong as quickly as we can. Now this guy in the middle, this is a takahe. Some people will get confused and call it a pukeko, which they are related, but this is the version that doesn't fly, and this is the endemic species here to New Zealand. This is Hawkeye. Hawkeye came to us when the rangers out at Burwood Bush in Teanau noticed that he was off of his food, which is pretty unusual for him. I don't think the picture probably does him justice, but he's quite a hefty takahe. And I think, yeah, they're just total dinosaur birds. They're really cool. He was off his food. I thought, okay, something's wrong. We need to get him to the vets. And so he came to us, and on physical exam, he looked great. He lost a little bit of body condition, but otherwise was looking quite good. No obvious injuries. So we went to start the process to sedate him for X-rays just to see if we could diagnose anything else. And Nurse Gina opened his mouth and went, hang on, what's going on there? And noticed that there was something stuck in the back of his throat. And so what happened when they removed the thing that was stuck at the back of his throat was that they discovered he had so enthusiastically been eating his tussock that had a really sharp spear at the end of it. It just impaled the back of his throat and then snapped off. and that the tip of that tussock was embedded into the back of his throat, and it became infected. Which would definitely put me off my food, so I totally understand that. So thankfully that was a pretty easy fix. So they removed the tussock spear, and we treated him with some antibiotics, and he was well on his way pretty quickly back on his food, which is great. And on the right-hand side here, be curious to see if anybody has guessed what this one is. But it's a little bit of a tricky one, because a lot of people will suggest that it's a pied stilt, which is a great guess. But it's actually a cocky or a black stilt. It's just a juvenile. So it's got the black and white plumage as the juvenile, and that can be really easily confused with a pied stilt. But when it gets its adult plumage, it will be all black. So you can see this is a bird that is, like 90% leg. So most of the stilt is a great name, right? It's perfect. It's like walking around on chopsticks. So most of the cocky or black stilt that come to us with leg injuries or foot injuries, most commonly bumblefoot, which is an infection in the foot. So if any of you, like the bird keeper at Auckland Zoo, of course, will be really familiar with bumblefoot, which is also known as pododermatitis. It's often something that you would see in birds that are held in captivity. So when they're walking around on hard surfaces that they're not really naturally intended to walk on, they can get these infections on the bottom of their feet. They get little cuts that can get infected, etc. The cocky, this is a great example of a native that, if we didn't have serious interventions and serious recovery programs, this bird would be extinct. It's similar, of course, with the takahe as well. They are highly susceptible to mammalian predation. So many of you who will be involved in predator-free work will, of course, know this. Cocky, there's a takahe recovery program. There's also a cocky recovery program through DOC. The cocky, there is a wild population. It's very small. Unfortunately, I think it has gotten better in the last couple of years, but I still think there are around maybe that 160 wild adults in the breeding population. 160, that's not many for a bird that used to be found all the way around New Zealand. And unfortunately, if they didn't take interventions like removing all of the eggs that are laid in the wild to incubate, hatch them in captivity, 0% of those eggs would go on to survive. And that is strictly down to stoat incursions. So stoats will take 100% of the eggs that are laid in the wild without intervention. Thankfully, there is a pretty strong trapping program that's being done with DOC and iwi that seems to be making a difference for cocky in the Mackenzie Basin, which is fantastic. But they still need a lot of support. So all that to say, that is why these birds come to us with pododermatitis or bumblefoot, is because they are being hand reared from being incubated, the wild eggs being incubated, and also breeding program. So, although there's a lot of measures that you can take in an aviary environment, there are certainly, we do come up with cases of bumblefoot. Now, this one you can see, sorry, my cursor is not working, but if you look at the bird, the orange banded leg, and you follow up towards the body, you'll see a little something there on the outside of the leg. That's an external fixator, and it's something that the vets will deploy if they can't put a pin inside of the leg, if they can't pin a broken bone, they will use this external fixator option, and that's what's happening here with this cocky. All right. Okay, so this little guy on the left, this is a really fun one for me to quiz people on because almost everybody gets it wrong, but on occasion, some people will get it right, but I'll put you out of your misery. What we can tell from this photo with that fluff is that it's a chick. This is a baby, and this is actually a baby Karadoo or Karadoo chick. And we don't normally see them looking like this. Normally they should be in their nests at this age, but sometimes they take a tumble, which is what happened to this one. So it's getting old enough that it was starting to explore its little surroundings there and just went a little bit too far over the edge of the nest. Was found on the ground, thankfully not injured, we were able to send that out to Project Karadoo for a bit of rehab and to get raised up before being released. Most of our Karadoo patients come to us from window strike. So very common for Karadoo to see the reflection of the sky and clouds and trees in your windows and think that they have a clear flight path right on through, and then they smack into the window and they break or dislocate their coracoid clavicle bones, similar to our clavicle in humans. We can fix that. It's just we need to get them pretty soon after they've hit the window. So most people will, when we get these patients from window strike, they will notice that there's a Karadoo sitting on the ground, or they've heard it or seen it hit the window. And if it hasn't moved after about 15 or 20 minutes, it probably can't. It can't fly with that broken bone, so it needs to come into the hospital for care. And unfortunately, what does sometimes happen is while the bird is sitting there, it's completely vulnerable, and then can be attacked by cats or dogs or something else that comes along. So we've had a few patients that have had that sort of double whammy situation where they've hit a window and then been attacked by a cat. I always generally ask an audience if they've ever had a Karadoo fly into their window, and you would be astonished. Every single audience, there's always somebody that has had a Karadoo hit their window. There are some little stickers, little decals that you can purchase that have a little reflection in them. They reflect a range of UV light that we can't see, but that birds can see. And it helps just alert them to the fact that there is maybe something there that they don't want to fly into. And you can purchase those through Project Karadoo. They bring those in from overseas. You can check out their projectkaradoo.org.nz if you want to give those a try, if you have a repeat window strike area on your home or your business or what have you. It's worth trying. And Nick, you're going to be my timekeeper, right? You keep an eye on me if I am going for too long, because I get excited about these stories. Sorry.
Well, no, they're very interesting. It'll just make we'll probably have a little less time at the end for questions, but that's okay. You keep going.
I'll just try to move it along a little bit faster. Cool. So this guy here in the middle, this is a kahu or a harrier hawk. You can see that it has a bandage on its feet, so you'd be forgiven for thinking that it has a foot injury. But this actually came to us with lead poisoning or lead toxicity, which is really common. It's the two common things we see harriers for are being struck by vehicles or for lead toxicity. These birds are scavengers, so they eat things that are already dead, like roadkill, for example, or rabbit carcasses that have been shot with lead pellet. And when they eat those rabbits, they're actually ingesting, a bit of the lead into their systems, and it's poisoning them. So the poison was telling this bird that it should go like this with its feet. It's just a neurological reaction. And so it was clenching its feet and was at risk of piercing its foot with its own talon. So that's why we put that ball bandage to keep the foot flat and safe from the talons. Now this beauty on the right is an erect crested penguin. It's not normally one that spends much time on the mainland. They're mostly on offshore islands south of mainland New Zealand. But from time to time, they do have a little OE and they come exploring. They'll rock up on the mainland, sometimes at the time when they're going through their annual molt. So all penguins go through a molt where they push out all their old, dry, used up feathers and grow in beautiful new feathers for the next year. That has to happen all at once, and they can't go out to sea when they're molting because they're not waterproof and they're not insulated. So they have to stand in one spot on the beach when that happens, which I can imagine is excruciatingly boring for them, but is also really, really a vulnerable time. So they can't go out to sea. They have no defense against predators at all whatsoever. So unfortunately, what happens is sometimes these birds will turn up, not being familiar to the area. They'll turn up on a dog beach and they don't realize it, and they get chomped by dogs, which is what happened to this patient. All it takes is a second for a dog to grab a penguin, give it a shake, and that's it. So please, in the summertime especially, don't let your dogs run into the dunes where you can't see them. That your dogs can definitely smell those penguins sitting there for 3 weeks, but you may not see them at all. All right, 3 more. So here on the left, we have Karadoo, or New Zealand Falcon. Beautiful bird. This is just like totally an egregious shot. Like I don't have much to say about this bird, I just wanted to include it because it's so beautiful. This is a young male that came to us, just had a little bit of, it had been into care 3 different times, actually, this particular individual bird. So it's, pretty adventurous young male, but thankfully really minor injuries all 3 times, and was back on its way. In the middle here, we have, of course, a tui, and the tui looks like it's ready to hit the beach in its summertime jandals, but this is actually was with us for this very similar reason to the harrier, which is that it had the toxicity issue, and it was clenching its feet. Not lead in this case, possibly rhododendron toxicity. There are certain species of rhododendron that can be toxic to native birds. Thankfully, they seem to know which ones to stay away from for the most part. And I'll preempt the question. I do not know which type of rhododendron it is. I have tried to find out for people, but nobody actually is sure.
Wow.
On the right-hand side is a penguin called Diego. He's a juvenile male hoiho. Normally, I promise we do not dress our patients. There is a valid reason for him wearing this adorable outfit. He came to us with a bald patch on his back, and there was no injury. We don't know why he had the bald patch, but behaviorally, then there became a problem, which is when the feathers were growing back in, he was plucking them out. So it was probably itchy or tickling him or whatever. We don't know why, but he couldn't go back out to sea with that bald patch. So we just had to come up with a way of keeping him from plucking those feathers out as they were regrowing. So the simplest thing to do was just to put a t-shirt on him so he couldn't get to his feathers. So it's both cute and effective. But I think just both of these pictures show that sometimes you have to get a little bit creative with some of the solutions for wildlife. And yeah, we are extremely lucky, extremely privileged to be able to care for a native parrot species. These are the big three. On the left, we have Cockapoo, a master of camouflage. That is Xena. And again, I'm really sorry my cursor is not working, but you can see her left foot on that log. And you can also see on where her right foot should be. She just has a little bit of a stump. She got caught out, got stuck in a tree hanging upside down out on Pukenui Anchor Island, which is where she lived. And she lost, unfortunately, we had to amputate all of her toes as a result of the time that she spent hanging upside down with blood loss to that foot. But parrots are extremely adaptable, so she was able to still climb naturally, actually quite a good climber, even with her stump, which is quite amazing. If you haven't already checked out our Facebook page, please do so, because we have some incredible footage of our cockapoo patients that we have in-house. We've been involved in the cockapoo recovery breeding season since we opened a big breeding season again this year. And we've hand-reared some chicks for cockapoo recovery, and their antics are fantastic. So I recommend checking those out. Of course, on the right here, we have South Island Kaka in the middle and Kia on the right. The South Island Kaka that you see in the middle is one of the 4 patients I mentioned in the very beginning that came to us from Nelson as part of Project Jansoon. So we hand-reared those Kaka patients that were to be released in Abel Tasman National Park. And if you're very lucky, if you're out doing the Abel Tasman walk, you might be able to see some of these former patients of ours. On the right is a young male, Kia. We had him in the first level 4 lockdown, and we were given the privilege of naming him. And so we named him Bloomfield after Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, is what was on our mind at the time. And he's been released into the Murchison Mountains. So if you're a tramper, you might meet Bloomfield out there. Love having these beautiful birds in hospital. Super intelligent, which means that they are extremely challenging to have as patients, especially when they start feeling better. We learned really early on when we had the first of these parrots that we had to padlock their cages. They do easily figure out how to open them and let themselves out and create parrot chaos in the hospital. So lots of enrichment challenges with these birds. We do mostly have bird patients, but we certainly treat all New Zealand species. So just want to represent our reptile and mammalian patients as well. So on the upper left, we have a gorgeous jeweled gecko. This is Manua. He is absolutely beautiful. He did unfortunately pass away last year, year before last. We just think he was an older gecko, but absolutely beautiful. And we all had a little bit of crush on him, I think. Couldn't help ourselves. He's so gorgeous. Bottom left is Brutus. Brutus, of course, is a tuatara. She's the only tuatara patient that we've had the privilege to care for, but it was really exciting to have her with us. We learned heaps, and I fell in love with her a little bit as well. Brutus lives at the Kiwi Birdlife Park in Queenstown, so she's part of a captive population, so you can actually go and visit her if you're in Queenstown. And on the right here is a New Zealand sea lion pup. As I mentioned, we do care for seals and sea lions. Typically, the adults we would treat in the field for obvious reasons, but we can care for pups as needed in the hospital because thankfully they're pretty small compared to their parents. So what are the results here? That we've talked about a lot of different patients. What does that mean? what good do we do, I guess, is the question. So looking back at last year, we had 568 patients come through the hospital. Pretty typical. We're usually around about 600 patients. And in brackets there, you can see 2,155 is the total cumulative number of patients we have seen through end of 2021. So that would be through 4 full years of operation of the hospital. Last year, we had 58 different species. In total, we had seen up to 83, but we've added a few this year, which is pretty cool. And this number is really important. 62% of our patients are holding either an endangered, threatened, or at-risk status. So these are species that need a lot of help. They need a lot of help with, on the front ends, with making sure they have enough habitat, with making sure that they're safe from predators. And then when they get into some kind of strife, that they have veterinary help as well. But the bottom number is the one we're really proud of, and that's 80% success rate, around 80% success rate across all species, and getting those animals fixed up and back out to the wilds where they belong. Hoi-ho yellow-eyed penguins are our most frequently admitted patients. So last year we had 183 hoi-ho come through our hospital. The majority of those were chicks, which you see here in this picture. That's a basket full of hoi-ho chicks. There's been avian diphtheria outbreaks in the entire mainland population over the last couple of years. And when we get them at this age, we are able to treat them within about 3 or 4 days if we get them young enough, and turn them back out to their natal nests within a couple of days, which is fantastic because the nest is best, as we say. And we've seen a total of 616 yellow-eyed penguin patients through the end of 2021. So that's, again, through 4 years of our operations. Everyone has a number. This is our great big number. Costs us about 650 grand each year to run the hospital. And we could not do what we do without our partners and supporters. So these are some of our sponsors here across the top, our cornerstone sponsors. And I just want to give a special shout out to the Grand Casino here in Dunedin, who sponsors our community education program. So it allows us to get out and do events like this and to let people know about the work that we do and about how they can maybe help some of these species do a little bit better. We do not exist without our volunteers, so just a huge shout out and acknowledgement to the wonderful group of people that help us all the way from governance on our trust board, all the way down to getting elbow deep in penguin poo and cleaning out cages with us. So we thank the community for their time and their efforts. And sorry, I was rushing at the end, but I want to make sure we take time for questions. So that's all I have for you today, and I'm really happy to answer questions, and I will not lie to you if I don't know the answers.
Oh, that was brilliant. No, look, it's great. It doesn't matter how long you took doing that. It was just, pictures are so cool. And people love it. They're giving you the thumbs up, and they love what you do. The volunteers, how, like you were saying, you were thanking them, but how really important are the volunteers? Because we have so many volunteers through predator-free organisations.
Absolutely crucial, yeah. And especially, I will say, we started out in a really lean way with 2 staff members, 1 vet, 1 vet nurse. And if we didn't have volunteers helping us with pretty much every part of our operation, we would have fallen over. So it's absolutely impossible for us to operate without people helping us. And as we've stabilized a bit over the last few years, we have thankfully rely less on volunteers, but they still just bring such an important, enrichment to our work and diversity and ways of thinking. And yeah, just honestly I can't say enough about it. That I started the first 5 years that I was involved in the Wildlife Hospital. I was a volunteer myself. So it's just, sometimes it just takes a village, right?
Exactly. And somebody asked, how do you work out where to reintroduce these animals after you've made them well again?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The best practice for both wildlife medicine and also for culturally for Ngāi Tahu, which is the iwi down in our area, is it's really important that we try to release them back close to where they were found, as close to home as possible. But that is evaluated based on, is it a safe environment? Were they found in a safe environment? Is it a place that they would naturally be? So great example would be those pelagic seabirds that are found storm wrecked, in the Octagon. We've had seabird patients come to us from the center part of Dunedin. Obviously, we wouldn't be releasing them there. We're releasing them at a safe cliff location or in the water, for example. And yeah, so we have to find the right balance, but we do typically try to return them to where they're from.
And what happens to the wildlife that cannot be released into the wild again?
So unfortunately, that's generally going to be a euthanasia case. So if there isn't a possibility for, if we don't, aren't nearly 100% sure that a patient can go back to the wilds, it's extremely rare for us to be able to place an animal in captivity, a wild animal in captivity. I'm not actually sure, to be honest with you, if we've been able to do that in the last nearly 5 years. So that's pretty limited opportunity. So it's either wild or euthanasia, unfortunately.
Understand. Down there in Dunedin, you're magnificently covered, and of course you have an awful lot of native creatures down there, and a great trapping program. I mean, everything's really cooking down there. The rest of the country as well, situated for if you find a native creature that's not well.
So there are a few other wildlife hospitals. So there's the South Island Wildlife Hospital in Christchurch. There is a movement to get a wildlife hospital open in Kaikoura. There's the Wellington Zoo has the Nest facility there. They do some wildlife work alongside their zoo animals. There's Wild Base in Palmerston North, and then there's Auckland Zoo, which also has a hospital that takes wildlife. So there is a bit of a spread north and south. I would say probably the west coast of the South Island is not, it's pretty remote, and there are probably local vets that are helping out there. But for the most part, those animals will be flown to a different facility. So we do get West Coast animals flown to us, and they get flown to the South Island Wildlife Hospital as well.
What's the sort of ratio of predator, natural, and human-caused injuries?
Yes, that's a tricky one for us to determine in terms of we don't always know what's caused the injuries that our patients have. So it's hard for us to be, other than just saying trauma or predator, predation, we don't always know what's caused it, if it was a natural predator or introduced. That's a tricky one. I would say probably my gut tells me that most of the injuries that we see are natural. They are things that just happen over the course of events. But yes, certainly have seen plenty of attacks as well. Cats and dogs probably are the most prevalent predator attacks that we see.
Well, we're nearly at the end, so I got one for you, and that is, what's your favourite? Do you have a favourite, one that you can remember that sticks in your mind and you always think about that patient?
Yes, I do. I will tell you just briefly about Crystal. Crystal is a yellow-eyed penguin. She came to us in our very first year when we were just doing a temporary summer pop-up hospital back in 2016. She came to us absolutely shredded by a shark. And thankfully, Dr. Argilla was able to save her, which was fantastic. And then in 2017, we were doing another, then it was the next year. She came back to us again with a shark bite. Not as bad this time. Dr. Argilla was able to patch her up. She came back again the third year with another shark bite. Again, not as bad. So she was learning, or she was, the sharks were tired of chasing her. I don't know. Again, able to fix her up and send her back. And then we were quite worried when we didn't see her the next year, because we thought, oh, maybe the sharks finally got her. But really, really pleased, like the most chuffed you could possibly imagine. In the last breeding season, we heard from the rangers that she was found down in Southland, and she had her first 2 chicks. So fantastic result. And it's great that we could we could save her and she could go on to contribute to that population.
Jordana, you have been brilliant. Thank you so much for your time and energy, the work that you do. And to those people watching the webinar, if you missed any part of it, we have recorded this and we do put it on our Facebook page alongside all our other webinars.
Can I just say one last thing? And that's, if you've asked a question and you haven't heard your answer, we're running out of time. You can email me, info@wildlifehospitaldunedin.org.nz, and it would be my pleasure to answer your question.
Thank you so much. Keep up the good work, and we will hopefully hear more about you. And to everybody that watched this webinar, thanks so much, and we will catch you for our next one really soon. Thank you.
Kia ora, ka kite.